The topic I'll be covering today is crypto yield. And before going forward, it's important to establish why this is a relatively important topic to cover to begin with. So just by a raise of hand, how many of you guys have, a Bitcoin somewhere or some Bitcoin? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you have actually read the original white paper? That's pretty high coverage. How many of you remember what was the first sentence of that paper? Really? Shockingly so. Okay. Typically, I got 0 out of audience when I asked that question. But just for the rest of you who don't have a photographic memory, such as this gentleman sitting here, the first sentence basically says that Bitcoin was supposed to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Okay? So it was originally designed to pay for stuff like Starbucks and whatnot. And we all know that's not necessarily the case at the moment, right? You used to be able to buy a Tesla with Bitcoin. Not anymore. Let's see how that goes anytime soon. So from what we see from our angle, cryptocurrency in general, Bitcoin and beyond, are largely a speculative financial assets at this particular moment, and that's perfectly fine. But having a yield generated on this particular thing is very important for the maturity and adoption of particular assets because, everything else, traditional finance, how you value this thing, having a cash flow generated from an asset will make it, I think it will play a very, very important role in the general adoption of this. So that's what we're going to cover today in my little speech here. So before going forward, just a quick few words about myself. So I've spent the past 15 years basically straddled between tech and finance, and then those are basically the only two things that I actually enjoy doing myself. And if you think about what we're doing now, which is pretty much a crypto lending, managed yield farming type of a firm, it doesn't get more Venn diagram intersection than where those two things intersect. So the firm was founded in 2017 or so. We did an A run with folks like Coinbase Venture and whatnot. And we are purely institutional facing, so which give us a slightly different perspective than some of the more retail facing folks out there. And the topic for the title for the chat today that I'll go over, well, it's a bit clickbaity, but bear with me here. So the point is that the yield from where we see is a huge spectrum how people generate that yield, ourselves included. Some of them extremely not transparent, and it's really just a time bomb before one of those guys blow up. So I hope you all grab your popcorn and get a front row seat when that happens. And on the other hand, we also see some really, really, really exciting innovation happening, where we see that could really be the new frontier for a lot of the yield-generating activities in this particular segment. So there will be three things three main buckets of way to generate yield in crypto that I want to cover today. So the first one is trading based, right? When I talk about trading, I don't mean buy a Bitcoin, sit on it, or short a Bitcoin and hope it'll go down. So that you take the delta risk, that's a very different type of a thing than what we're talking about. That's not yield. So a lot of times when people talk about trading related yield generating in crypto, what you're actually referring to are the folks who are doing largely delta neutral type of activities. So that means that you long short in different places, either by arbitraging or statistical. So mostly you don't really take any of the price risk going up and down. So that's the first bucket. And the second bucket is borrowing and lending, so essentially the credit side of things, which I think is actually one of the most exciting areas in crypto for a very simple reason. It's not exactly sexy, so people don't really talk about it, but it's actually it's huge in comparison in terms of a volume and size compared to what a trading business is if you look at the traditional financial segment, right? Whereas in crypto, it's really, really tiny. So it's underdeveloped, underserved. But there's so much shenanigans happening in that particular segment, it's almost comical. And the last thing, which I think is probably the newest entrance to the arena, but it's also the most chaotic one at the moment, is DeFi yield farming. So today, the three things I want to cover in terms of the past, present, and the future will be trading, lending and credit, and yield farming. Yeah? So without further ado, let's get into it. Yeah, trading. So I guess most of us sitting here are somewhat familiar with the basic idea of trading, right? But the specific kind of trading that I'm talking about is very algorithmic and very statistical driven. So most likely as an individual, you're never going to come across this type of a thing. It's mostly institutional. And if you want to do it yourself, that is tremendously difficult, and you're going to go up some really, really big guys in this space. So you know the saying that people's been saying in crypto that institutions coming. From what we've seen, the institutions has been there for the past 10 years. They just didn't tell you about it, right? Like the trading funds in the US, some of the biggest shop on the planet that we know of, has been there for the past 10 years, made a shit ton of money in 2017, and they continue to do so. But that's not retail facing. So, and specifically in those times, let's say if you roll back 5 to 6, 7 years ago, it's just a fairly easy affair, to be frank. Like, right? Even Bitcoin today is traded between hundreds of different places. Like price dislodging happens all the time across those different places. Doing arbitraging on some of those exchanges, say like 3 years, 4 years back in the day, you can even do it manually if you really feel like it. So what's happening in that particular space right now is that we see a lot of the bigger shops that historically have stayed away from trading crypto in the algorithmic space are like coming in serious manner in the past 2 to 3 years or so. So what that actually means is that the market is becoming more and more efficient. The fact that everyone's scheming on top of it will continue to present as long as the market is fragmented in terms of trading venue. If you have like 100 places trading the same asset, by definition, the price will dislocate at some point and somebody's going to scheme that price differences, right? So that will continue to happen, but it's getting kind of more and more annoying to do it because you have to have heavier and heavier infrastructure, better and better statistical models. It's getting harder and harder. So going into the future, what we see in this particular segment is that we see more and more capital coming in and bigger brains coming in as well. So we see consolidation happening here. The smaller guys will be slowly whipped off, right? So market making, for example, there are like shit ton of market makers everywhere. At this particular moment, if you look at the traditional market, there's the top few accounts for large amount of the market share. We see that consolidation happening in the years to come. So tougher day by day, so to speak, in trading. Now the lending and the credit. This is actually a relatively new thing. Until maybe like 3-4 years ago, there was no such thing as credit anything in crypto. I think Genesis Capital, based out of New York City, was one of the first firms that started doing it, maybe 3.5-4 years ago. So that particular industry basically went from zero 3.5 years ago to today. The quarterly origination is about like 50 billion or so. Now that might sound like a large number to you, but it's really, really, really not in grander scheme of things. One figure you can think about this is that you look at the total market cap of crypto, like what is it today? Is it more or less than 2 trillion? I don't know. And you compare that number to 50 billion, right? And that's essentially like the equity to debt ratio of crypto as a whole. Now, if you look at France as a country, currently the GDP to debt ratio is around 115%. Well, it used to be 80% before Corona, but then, shit happens. Now it's 115, so good for France. So if you just look by that simple measurement, this credit segment of crypto is really, really underdeveloped, and that's why it's a really, really exciting space for us to operate in, and a lot of institutional players are coming into this. Back in the days, it was also the same thing. When it first started it's a purely institutional to institutional facing thing. The retail is not aware of the fact that, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of cryptos being landed between different places until the retail-facing platform comes out, right? Like some of the larger players, BlockFi, Celsius, like whatever it is. So today, if you look at how a lot of those retail-facing firms operate, which we work with a lot of them anyway, is that they essentially package different type of yield generating activities into a saving account alike products and then give it to retail people. Now, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong per se with that. The only problem with that is that the regulators don't really like it because the retail people don't understand what type of risk they're actually taking here, right? So we've all seen the news, excuse me, BlockFi just did a $100 million settlement with SEC for disclosing and not disclosing certain information. Voyager, who is kind of a player like that out of Canada, also pretty big in North America, is just got served a bunch of notices from different state attorneys in US to basically seize their operation. Right. So what is happening is that the wild days are probably coming to an end, at least in the United States, because the government is on your ass. And typically, you don't want to pick up a fight with the US government. Typically, that doesn't go well. So Europe, on the other hand, is also catching up. The Asians, I don't actually know. Let's see what the government there decide to do in the years to come. So kind of like branching all of that information together, I think the key takeaway here in the lending and credit space is really that going forward, transparency is actually the key. It's not only that the regulator will force you to disclose information which you are currently not. Also, the institutions that we're talking to, they will not do anything in this space until you do so. So transparency is actually a key here. Now, the coolest part out of this is that DeFi yield farming. So I'm particularly excited about this particular subsegment of the industry for a simple reason that for once this is actually something new. The previous two things that I told you about is nothing new. It's just like same stuff that people have been doing on the TradFi space for probably 50, 60 years by now. They essentially lifted the model and the infrastructure and just basically dropped it on the other side in crypto. It's like, oh, everything works just fine. This one, however, is a little bit different. This one is actually tech-enabled innovation, and it's very open source in a sense that because it's crypto, anybody can do it, right? We've seen it with different AMMs and whatnot. Essentially, what you do here is that you could deploy your capital in both the form of cryptocurrency as well as stable coins, which is equivalent for dollars really at the moment, into one of those DeFi yield platforms. And well, actually, after that, you just kind of hope for the best. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But welcome to the game. Innovation comes with a lot of risks, but this is very exciting, at least to me. So the problem with this particular thing at the moment actually comes in that because it's very open sourcey, anybody can come up with a new thing, and the switching cost is basically zero. Switching someone's money from just a click a button on MetaMask, and the next thing you know, billions and billions is on the other side in a new platform. We saw what happened with SushiSwap and Uniswap back in the days, right? So it just basically 3 or 4 days, and 80% of the liquidity just went to the other side. So the key challenge here, is actually the following. It's very, very, very difficult at the moment for any institutional clients to touch this thing in a meaningful manner for many, many reasons. The anti-money laundering thing is very difficult to control. Most people do not understand it. We have a whole team that basically spend all day, every day, just open up all the new contract, Twitter spits out at you, go through the codes line by line, and actually understanding what those protocols are doing. Because a lot of times, what the protocols are actually doing is very different than what the protocol tells you they're doing. And you have to go to the software to actually understand what is happening. That level of transparency is not comfortable for most institutions, let alone private individuals. So where are we going with this one? Well, my personal view is kind of a whack-a-mole until further notice. There will be new things coming out all the time. Some sort of a consolidation will take place. And just keep on whacking until and hope for the best. But I am actually particularly excited about this segment out of the three, because I think a lot of very useful long-term sustainable innovation will come out of this. Despite the fact that if you look at where the yield is generated in this segment at the moment, most of the yield actually comes in the form of the protocol essentially paying you with your native token to incentivize you to do something. That's not very sustainable, right? But let's hope somebody actually came up with a good idea and then fix this once for all, and then we can all benefit a little bit more from this. So, in summary, a key takeaway, very new thing, underdeveloped, underserved. On the trading side, the thing is that the type of strategy that I've been talking about traditionally on the TradFi side is very much like a hedge fund institutional facing thing. It's very, very difficult for a retail person to get any sort of exposure to that, which is why we operate in the B2B segment, because otherwise you just can't get any of that piece of the pie, right? The lending and credit, my personal prediction is that something bad is going to happen sooner or later with one of those players out there, and you know, I'm always up for a good show. So let's see how that blow up looks like. If that doesn't happen anytime soon, I think the regulator nevertheless are coming to this space to kind of formalizing things a little bit more. I don't think retail folks have any idea what type of risk they're taking. They're underpricing that risk dramatically. But you know, then again, nothing new in crypto nor finance in general. And then lastly, yield farming, a lot of new opportunities. I think the only thing you can do at this moment is to think about the risk, try to understand it as much as you can, and diversify your portfolio to the furthest extent possible. Because here, what you're actually dealing with is known unknown risk, right? You know that you don't know the risk that's going to happen. It's one of those things that everything will work until the day it doesn't, and you don't know when that's going to happen, right? It's like a security risk in software. You know there's security vulnerabilities, but until somebody figures it out, nobody knows this. So that information asymmetry distribution, by definition, makes this one very, very difficult unless you have enough expertise, confidence, and capital to diversify. It's very, very difficult for individual to make a kind of like a valid proposition for themselves to do this unless you have like shit ton of capital and people who can do this for you. Yeah. So those are the three things that I think that are very interesting. Those are the three main ways I think crypto yield is going forward until further notice. So on that, thank you very much for your time, and we're open for some questions.
On the yield farming piece, what are your thoughts about some of the strategies that some of the protocols have deployed to make it more sustainable? So like Curve with their incentives for you to lock up your tokens for 4 years, and then like all the plays that have come off of that. I know Yearn also does buybacks, stuff like that.
Yeah, so once again, so the way I would evaluate something like this is that if you look at Curve as an ecosystem, right? And if you take like the classic economist approach to basically look at what is happening in that, like look at it as a little country, basically, right? You look at it, what they're actually doing is that the central bank is printing shitload of tokens for people to do something. It doesn't really matter if you say, okay, you have a 4-year lockup period, so what? You delay the inflation by 4 years. That's not sustainability in my book whatsoever. The only sustainable piece of that country is that when trading happens, part of the fee goes to the protocol that are distributed to the users. That's a sustainable part, right? Because that's economic activity driven cash, but kind of like a yield generation. Everything else that you see, which is, I mean, we're on Curve ourselves, right? Like we did the numbers, we projected the inflation. And that's fine, but it's not sustainable. Like that's not a sustainable solution to the problem that I proposed. At least that's what I think.
So you have a lot of money available. Do you do arbitrage on a centralized exchange or on DEX to earn money with your money, or do you do lending for your company?
Are you talking about me or the company or yourself?
About Tesseract.
Oh, okay. So we don't do any tradings ourselves. Like our firm only do like so we do manage DeFi yield farming because we feel like that's one piece where folks like us who spend years looking at it and have the technical resources to understand what's behind it can do it for institutions. And the lending and borrowing has been something that we've been doing for many years. And the counterparty we deal with are like multi-billion-dollar counterparties. So we feel like very comfortable doing stuff with them. The trading piece is one of those things are, at least if you haven't done it for 10 years somewhere else and you don't have shit ton of capital, it's too late to go in there. So that's something that we partner with other people, but we don't do it ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah. But like so the other thing is have you guys ever wondered like why anybody would borrow Bitcoin to do what? Right? Why? Okay. So I mean, of course, people want to borrow dollars, right? Like that makes sense. Like if you want to leverage up your trade. So there's basically two kind of classic use case for what do you call it? Credit activity specifically dominated in crypto. So one, somebody want to short it. Okay. Once again, not super sustainable. This market is expanding so much. Most people is on the long side, right? So the only other people like in this whole world who would ever borrow, $100 million block of Bitcoins are essentially market makers who need to cash pre-fund the account, essentially net working capital purposes, right? And the market makers are essentially the people who are doing statistical delta neutral strategy on the trading side, and they're not going to take your money. Like why would they? Like I wouldn't, right? Like some of the biggest prop shops who are doing this right now, they're prop shops. It's like a $50 billion thing, and it's just like basically the employees' money, and that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Last question before lunch. There we go.
Thank you. What kind of slashing protection do you offer?
Sorry, what?
Slashing protection.
Slashing? In like the staking context?
Yeah.
We don't do staking.
No. So who do you think would be the best?
For what?
Like the most secure for retail to invest in to generate
get some yield on your
yield?
crypto?
Yeah, and would offer the best protection.
Well, it's a difficult question because we work with all of them. I wouldn't put my own money there. But then again, I probably see something a little bit, like I probably see a bit more stuff than, your average crypto Chad. Okay, let's go back to the classic sentence here, which is that like whatever you put on any of those platforms, be very willing to lose it all. That's probably the best, right? None of them actually have insurance. There's another thing that's important to notice. Like when you go to websites where it says insurance, right? The only people on this whole planet who offer any insurance on crypto anything, it's lawyers in London. And what they're insuring is not the credit risk or investment risk. They're essentially insuring the operational and security risks. It's very important for all of us to understand that. So that insures only if one of those guys get hacked. But that's extremely unlikely because they essentially almost always outsource their custody to a professional player like Copper, BitGo, or whoever, right? So then the custodian then will carry further insurance. No one's gonna insure your credit risk. If one of those guys screw up and your money is gone, it's gone. That's it. Right? Like you don't even have the government in this case to give you up to 100K deposit insurance. I don't know what it is in Europe actually, but at least in US, the Federal Reserve Bank give you 100K, right? If you're like 105K, somebody screw up, well, good luck, you just lost 5K of your money. And maybe the government will print a little bit more to give you the 100K, but then the inflation will just slap you in the face there. So you really need to think about what to do with that, right? Like I think US just hit like 8.5% as of yesterday. So like every year, 8.5% of your money basically go up in thin air. Could be worse. I mean, like I grew up in a developing country. It can get a lot worse than 8.5. You think 8.5 is high. Wait until it gets to triple digits. Then it's really high.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Thank you, Yichen.